Digital Devil Saga opens up with a text exchange between two parties. The entity behind the green text believes that man should return to its origins and embrace the truth, but the other writer disagrees, begging for them to stop, but to no avail. The conversation ends with the green texter revealing that they want to release the uncontrollable rage living inside everyone where they're at. Moving on, the camera pans in on an intense standoff between two factions. The ones on the hill are called Embryon, led by Surf, the main protagonist. The ones below call themselves Vanguards, and they're led by a man named Harley. Overlooking the terrain, Surf spots a giant egg nearby, but the binoculars show no readings for it. Surf then gives the go-ahead to three other squad mates to move forward. Arjula, the pink-haired woman, provides overwatch while Surf goes to join his squad. Grabbing some cover, Surf notices a black cat, but he's quickly forced out of cover by an explosive crossbow bolt. Surf then pulls a Neo and returns fire following a sick-ass dive to the ground. Him and his crew mag dump the rest of the explosive bolts, causing a huge explosion next to the egg-shaped object. Gale, the man with the green hair, issues a warning over the radio to the Vanguards to either remove the object or risk a full-scale war with Embryon. In response, Harley repeats this warning verbatim, with the names flipped of course, as a verbal middle finger. While this is all happening, tentacles at the base of the egg begin to move on their own. Before anyone has the chance to act, the egg starts glowing and suddenly it explodes. Emerging from the blast are rays of white light that pierces the chest and abdomen of everyone at the scene. All of them begin transforming into terrifying monsters and start violently slaughtering each other. Waking up from the carnage, Gale wonders where the Vanguards have disappeared to. Cello, the man with the long hair, calls Surf over to check out a crater. Occupying the crater is a fully nude young woman lying down in fetal position. Heat, the guy with the aggressively red hair, feels like he's met this woman before and wants to learn more about who she is. We're then brought back to Embryon's base, Muladhara, which is their slice of a city called the Junkyard. The mysterious woman is still asleep and the crew is left with nothing but questions about her. There's another thing. Everyone now has a tattoo on their body as a result of the explosion. Heat decides that him and Surf will go to the Vanguard's territory to find out exactly what the hell is happening. Arjula also decides to tag along, leaving Cello and Gale to hold down the fort. The game gives us control, and we can move around Muladhara. I would highly recommend speaking to your party members whenever you can throughout this game, because you get a feel for their mood on the situation at hand. I made the mistake of not doing that on my first playthrough, and I feel like I missed out on some characterization. Cello also feels like he knows this girl, but can't recall who she is. Gale reminds us that we should only be concerned with reaching a place called Nirvana. Speaking to one of the other members of Embryon reveals that the lights didn't just occur at the battlefield, but they flew all throughout the Junkyard. Also, let me just say that the music for Muladhara is really soothing. This is the type of track you'd want to hear after coming home from a long day of work or school. I mean, just listen to it. Going to the vendor reveals that inhabitants of the Junkyard make purchases through an item called a tag ring. It's kind of like those RFID bracelets that resorts or theme parks give to customers. So yeah, the vendor, it's a shop. You buy and sell stuff. That's pretty much it. Vendors in other locations will sell various items for different prices too, so make sure to always visit one near its respective dungeon. Players also save at spots called Karma Temples, but I'll talk more about those in a bit. Stepping outside of Embryon's base, we get to see more of their territory. Muladhara is an incredibly dense neighborhood, with buildings packed tightly together to form an endless ocean of gray, with the only other color deviating from the norm being a dark shade of yellow taking their spots on the pillars. Talking to another Embryon foot soldier reveals that there's an ongoing war between the tribes of the Junkyard. Any tribe that defeats the others will be allowed to leave the Junkyard and ascend to a place called Nirvana. Nothing is known about Nirvana, but it's implied to be a way better place to live than here. I know that this was an awkward spot to explain a crucial part of the lore, but I truly could not find anywhere else to bring this up. Anyways, Surf takes the elevator up and leaves Muladhara. One look at the map shows us that Embryon territory is somewhat below ground level, while still leaving its buildings and walkways exposed to the surface above, at least the ones facing the outside. I like to think of it as that base on Utapau in Star Wars Episode 3, where Obi-Wan fought General Grievous. The rest of the Junkyard's territories are above ground like you'd expect. We arrive at Svadisthana, territory of the Vanguards. Ardua notes that the base is strangely quiet, especially in a place where you'd expect high security. Talking to Heat, he knows the Vanguards fear us, but for some reason he can't get a grasp on the concept of fear itself. The trio enters the Vanguard's base. Moving around the base, there's no one to be seen, but I did find a few useful items and messed with these switches that raises and lowers these walkways that also act as walls themselves. After navigating the spot for a bit, we walk into a room with the terrified Harley and his soldiers. Harley begs us not to eat him, which sets off alarm bells with Ardua since it's such an odd plea. Then he lays it out for us. We transformed into monsters, killed Harley's men, and ate them. Ardua pops out and mag dumps Harley's crew, and their bodies begin glowing while Harley flees the spot. Ardua's left stunned in disbelief. She couldn't have eaten those people. Harley's fallen soldiers rise up as monsters, and the Embryon crew begins to transform. Alright, it's time to throw down. Just like the other SMT games, Digital Devil Saga utilizes the press turn system. When you hit an enemy's weakness, not only do you deal more damage, but you also gain an extra turn. The game lets you lay it on thick, and attack weaknesses for more turns until you reach the max amount of turns possible. I don't think I need to tell you to use these extra turns to your advantage. Take time to do stuff like healing, adding buffs, hitting the enemy with debuffs, anything you think that'll help you emerge victorious. Critical hits from physical attacks also reward you with an extra turn, and those moments are always satisfying, more so when you absolutely need said turn. Attacking weaknesses and landing crits aren't the only things that'll give you extra turns during battle. If an enemy is frozen by an ice attack or stunned from an electric spell, hitting them while they're in this state rewards you with, you guessed it, more turns. Enemies can do the same thing as well. If they hit you with the spell that you're weak against, they gain extra turns. This can really mess you up if the enemy outnumbers you. If you're unlucky, enemies can put you in a stun lock and potentially wipe out your whole party. Don't think that you can just blindly attack enemies in this game or any other SMT title really. Missing attacks, having a spell deflected, absorbed, or completely blocked will result in you losing 2 turns. It's bad enough having that happen in Nocturne, but here in DDS, it's even worse because you can only have 3 active party members during fights, with the rest waiting on standby. This means that if you've spent your first turn, then missing or hitting some kind of resistance on the second will make you completely lose your party's turn and give it to the enemy. After a battle, you of course get items and money. The amount of cash you get is determined by how many turns took place during battle. This really isn't something you need to concern yourself with, as you'll get a pretty decent payout no matter how many turns were taken. So let's meet the cast. Starting with Surf, the player character, his stats are customizable, allowing the player to allocate 3 points to any stat they see fit after a level up. You can also use these special items called Noise to put 1 point into a stat. Those are pretty useful for catching up a specific stat that you feel like you've been neglecting. It's also a great way to ensure that you don't waste a level up trying to get them caught up in the first place. While we're on the topic, here's what each stat does. Strength measures how much physical damage a character deals and affects damage taken from physical attacks. This is a good stat to level because there are inevitably gonna be enemies that are either immune to magic or you might not have the right kind of magic in the first place. Another reason you want to level this stat is because there are dozens of physical skills you can use. These skills come with different effects, like attacking all enemies at once, poisoning the enemy after the hit lands. There's a lot. It's also worth noting that physical skills cost HP to use, as opposed to magic points. Magic is a measure of how much damage your magic will deal, while also measuring your defense against magic attacks as well. Vitality is the amount of HP you have. I don't think I need to elaborate any further. Agility affects turn order and your chances of landing and evading attacks. Luck influences a few different factors all at once. It affects your critical hit rate, the odds of you getting hit with the status condition, and the quality of item drops. This is a stat that I constantly forget to level because I'm so focused on balancing out other stats. Thankfully, the noise items exist, so I won't have to waste too many level ups bringing this stat up to speed. Getting back to the cast, next up is Heat. Heat is the heavy hitter of the crew. His strength and vitality stats are pretty high, and each hit he delivers puts the enemy closer to biting the dust, especially when he uses physical skills. Heat's two biggest drawbacks are that his magic stat is hardly increased during level ups, and he takes a lot more damage from magic attacks, especially from his weakness Ice. Argilla is the mage/healer archetype. She's got a high magic stat, which in turn gives her a large pool of MP. Argilla's the one who's pretty much in my party 24/7, unless she needs to be withdrawn from fights where she'll absolutely get destroyed. Gale is a balanced out fighter, with his stat distribution favoring both strength and magic. There's not much else I can say about him outside of Gale being pretty viable during most fights, with his only drawback being his weakness to lightning magic. And that brings us to our final party member, Cello. Cello is not the strongest party member, with his stats favoring agility and luck. His biggest drawback is his weakness to ailments. That alone makes it risky to bring Cello into fights where enemies will constantly spam party-wide ailment moves. It'd be one thing if he were weak against an element like, say, fire or ice, but ailments are more difficult to guard against because there's so many ways to trigger them. I mean, sure, you can have him learn something like null ailments, but it'll be real late in the game by the time you have the means to learn it. Getting back to the plot, the foes are defeated, and Argilla is disgusted at the stunning realization that they've become cannibals. She can't bring herself to feed on the bodies of her enemies. Heat, however, delivers a harsh reminder that this must be done to ensure survival. It all becomes clear. If anyone inflicted with this ailment wants to continue living, they must consume others like them or they'll succumb to it. Such a circumstance would force one to call their humanity into question. Cannibalism between humans in developed societies is extremely rare and shunned upon. It's an especially grotesque infliction of violence, done as an act of extreme sadism by someone who's discarded their humanity, whether it be out of a genuine desire for the taste of human flesh, or the need to desecrate their victim's corpse as one final, brutal act of humiliation. In situations such as the one the people of the Junkyard are in, some, if not many, might question if the need to live is worth having to eat someone else. Is survival worth losing your humanity over time as you repeatedly consume more enemies? Or would you want to try to stay alive long enough to find a cure for the sickness in the hopes that no one in the future is subject to a lifetime of sheer brutality? After the fight is over, a text box shows up and tells the player that the party devoured the bodies of their foes, restoring their HP in the process. With Harley's crew dead, the trio pushes forward so that they can hunt him down and see if he has an explanation for whatever the hell's going on. Oh yeah, random encounters are now active, so I recommend grinding a little bit while going through this dungeon. That way you can be better prepped for this dungeon's boss fight. Now that fight is by no means difficult, but it pays to get in some level ups this early in the game. Plus, it's a good chance to put some cash in your pocket for useful items. Some running around gets done, and we eventually run into Harley again, whom panics and orders one of his soldiers to raise a wall to slow us down. Not a particularly complex obstacle. We just gotta backtrack, go upstairs, and cross the catwalk sitting on top of that wall. After making it across, the trio runs into a Vanguard blocking our path, triggering a mini-boss. This is pretty much a tutorial teaching new players about exploiting enemy weaknesses. Once the enemy's taken care of, Surf pulls the switch and the wall comes down, allowing us to enter the door that Harley ran through. Upon entering the room, we find a save point and a healing station. The game gets saved, and after doing some navigating, we're attacked by two women from the Vanguard. This fight's purpose is to teach players about using void skills. For one turn, a void skill will completely negate the damage of the respective element. To give an example, when Surf uses Void Ice, damage that would have been taken from any ice skills will be voided once per party member during the enemy's turn. Void skills are really good to have during boss fights, but for regular encounters, I typically use them when there's an annoying enemy or set of enemies that do nothing but spam attacks we're weak against ad nauseum. After the battle, the game tells us that we can now set skills after leveling up our Atma point from devouring fallen enemies. I'm gonna go a bit deeper into skill setting later. Walking through the door, we encounter a shaken up Harley whom, surprise surprise, runs off yet again. I guess now feels like an appropriate time to discuss the enemies here. The enemies around this dungeon are your typical beginner SMT demons. You've got demons like Slime, Impusa, Preta, and Onmaraki just to name a few. The slimes can certainly take a beating, being able to withstand the few physical skills you have in your possession. This makes them incredibly annoying to fight if you're trying to conserve magic for the first boss. My strategy is to hit them with ice, which is one of their weaknesses, and wear them down with physical attacks until the fight's over. Impusa is pretty easy to beat, but waiting for their turn to be over, it's not fun. They like to fire off ice attacks at heat, and sometimes spam Mabufu, giving them more turns and dealing damage to not just heat, but now the entire party. Thankfully, any physical skills are able to put them at half HP before they're taken out by the next attack. Preta is another frail enemy. He's weak to fire and takes an average amount of damage from physical attacks. The thing that's annoying about him is that he can call reinforcements, which does nothing but pointlessly draw out the fight. I prefer just defeating them as quickly as possible, especially while I'm backtracking after leaving a save point. Cockatrice is another easy encounter. It's weak to ice and has no resistances to physical. The guy's regular attacks hardly do anything, but you should keep an eye out when he decides to use Body Rush. There's not much I can say about Onmaraki. He's an incredibly weak foe and doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. It also doesn't take much to knock this guy down either. You could destroy him with mental thought alone. Encounters with Onmaraki are typically over before they begin. Same thing applies to Alp and Morio. These two are so weak that the battle music won't even get past the first rift because you've already beaten them by the time it gets there. There's nothing more I can say about these guys, so let's move on. With the door Harley fled behind locked, we're forced to go upstairs and look for and activate a switch, which unexpectedly alters Harley's escape route. Harley's not making this easy on us. He's having us do a lot of backtracking, laden with a ton of random encounters. Then again, the amount of fighting I'm getting done has netted me a lot of cash and XP for the early game. After seeing Harley dash through yet another door, we're greeted to a save and healing station nearby. Coming across something like that this far into any dungeon is a telltale sign of an upcoming boss. But before starting the encounter, I go down to pick up some items left on the floor below. Ice Blast, an item that fires off Bufu, Chakra Drop, an item that restores a small amount of magic points, and Revival Gem, which revives a knocked out party member to full HP. With the party healed, items gathered, and the game saved, it's finally time to confront Harley.
Stay away!
Harley, tell us what's going on.
That is not important. Who exactly is the girl? What girl? Please don't. I don't know anything. I'm telling you the truth. Why don't you know? We were the only ones on the battlefield. Now who is the girl? Where did she come from? Answer me, Harley. Why the hell can't I get that girl out of my mind? Please. I really don't know.
I see now. There is one thing I finally understand. In this world, it's eat or be eaten!
And here we are, the first boss fight of the game. Harley's weak to ice attacks, so I make sure to kick off the fight with Bufu for the extra turn. Once it's Heat's turn, I get him to run Void Fire on the party, since Harley can use a physical attack that has fire attached to it. As for Argela, I just have her doing regular attacks and healing party members. With the turn coming back to Surf, I fire off a lucky Bufu spell that freezes Harley, resulting in Heat using the last turn to score an easy crit. Harley uses his only turn to fire off Skewer, that attack of his I mentioned earlier, and it does nothing. It's Surf's turn again, and he starts off using Bufu once more. With Heat, I tried using Venom Claw to see if it would poison Harley, but I don't think the poison effect works in this fight. Oh, and Ardua misses her attack. Coming back to Harley, he uses that skewer move again, but it doesn't seem to do a whole lot of damage. Surf fires off yet another freezing Bufu, resulting in the trio beating the absolute piss out of Harley with critical attacks. Heat sets up a Void Fire Shield, and Ardua uses the last turn to score another critical hit. Harley doesn't seem too happy about being on the losing end of this 3v1, so he decides to start fighting for real by setting up a Void Ice Shield. That's okay though, since there's nothing stopping us from using physical skills to bring down his HP. The gloves come off and Surf and Heat knock this guy around with skills like Hell Thrust and Poison Claw, while Ardua finishes the turn with a healing spell on Heat. It was at this moment that I paid for my cockiness because Harley unleashes a party-wide fire attack called Firestorm, being rewarded with the extra turn. Yeah, I got so wrapped up in wanting to defeat Harley that I legit forgot about using Void Fire. In an attempt to get things back in order, I spent this turn healing and going on offense, but also forgetting to set up the Fire Shield, resulting in Harley scoring yet another press turn icon and activating Ice Shield. On my next turn though, I finally remembered to use Void Fire, and Firestorm doesn't land. After some back and forth, Ardua lands the killing blow, securing a victory over Harley and the Vanguards as a whole.
Harley didn't know anything. Let's get out of here.
I feel so weak. Surf, we must get back to the base.
Sadly, this was all for nothing. Harley didn't know anything and went down fighting. As for the Vanguards, their defeat results in their army being absorbed into the ranks of Embryon. With no leader to guide them, they might as well fight under Surf. Before returning to base, I decided to do some shopping with the crazy amount of money in my possession. I really didn't buy anything special, just some rations and a few items to ward off status effects. Arriving back home, the trio is greeted to the sound of gunshots emerging from one of the buildings. It's Cello, and he's trying desperately to fend off Gale, who's in Atma form. Heat arrives just in time to try and defuse the situation, or really to instigate, until a woman's singing voice puts a stop to the confrontation as a whole.
Shanti, Shanti.
What in the hell was that?
A song.
The crew is absolutely stunned by the woman's ability to put a stop to someone's Atma form just from singing. This lady's name is Sarah, and she claims that she came here to help everyone. All her presence seems to do is raise more questions than answers. Sarah has no memory of where she came from. She just knows that her purpose here is to help. Inside Embryon's base, Gale flat out tells Sarah that she's incredibly suspect. He doesn't believe her claims of amnesia or her being here to provide assistance. Ardua, Cello, and Heat all claim to have heard her song somewhere, while Gale has no memory of it. Sensing some hope, Ardua believes that Sarah being here means that nobody in Muladhara will eat each other and that she might be able to return everyone to normal. Heat disagrees and tells Ardua she might as well get used to the whole turning into a monster thing. Suddenly, the base gets a message from the dissemination machine, the one overseeing the Junkyard. All tribe leaders are ordered to report to the Karma Temple this instant. When asked why, the machine tells Gale to shut up, and then the transmission ends. Ardua notes that it's highly unusual for the machine to summon all tribe leaders at once. Talking to Sarah, she doesn't have much to say outside of apologizing profusely. Gale, maintaining his professionalism, advises Surf to go to the temple as that might give us more insight on who Sarah is and the situation throughout the Junkyard as a whole. Outside the base, a conversation with Ardua reveals that she's noticed that her and Heat have been behaving far differently than usual. She also wonders if Heat noticed the same thing. It's finally time to go to Karma Temple for some answers. Upon arriving at the Sahasrara area, we're greeted with a beautifully melancholic guitar melody. The Karma Temple is a bit like the United Nations building. It's a place where tribe leaders meet to presumably hash out issues with one another and to ask the dissemination machine questions they have regarding the Junkyard. Walking up to the temple, Surf sees Ardua crouching near a cat. Ardua can't seem to figure out what it is though, and Surf continues on towards the building. Conversations with outside tribe members is either praise over the successful raid at Svadisthana, or them trying to intimidate us with empty threats. Oh, and Heat is just sitting there brooding like an edgelord. After walking around Karma Temple for a little bit, it's finally time to attend the meeting that we were summoned here for. Surf enters the meeting room, with the gaze of all tribe leaders locked on him as he makes his way towards his respective podium. After he twists the lock, the dissemination machine begins to move around, with these rays of light flowing from each fingertip. Janana kicks off the meeting by asking why we've all been summoned here, but the machine doesn't seem to have an answer for that. Then, out of nowhere, the machine freaks out and takes on a more sinister demeanor.
I am Angel. I am the one you invoke as you gaze at the heavens.
Angel.
Listen closely, as there is not much time. Mark these words as the temple's new commandment. Soon, the laws of nature governing this world shall regress to a more primal state of being. The key lies in the Atma you have gained. Atma is the power of demons, signified by the brands upon your flesh. A demon gains power by feeding. Rend, slaughter, devour your enemies. There is no other way to survive. You cannot escape your hunger, warriors of purgatory.
What is a demon?
The essence of your new selves, your karma, you cannot yet understand. If you wish to learn the truth, slay those assembled here and ascend to Nirvana. All that you desire shall be granted in Nirvana. End the stalemate with your newly awakened powers and fulfill my commandment at once.
Lupa, leader of the wolves, notes that outside of the newly gained Atma powers, nothing seems to have changed, but the machine creates an addendum. Any one tribe whom has slain the rest must bring Sarah to this angel being if they want to make it to Nirvana. We're given a choice of response, which causes the machine to freak out and repeat what she just told us a second ago. The machine now acknowledges the existence of demons. Once the scene is over, we're given access to a gameplay mechanic called mantras. Mantras are a set of skills that can be unlocked through leveling up your Atma points. These are all purchased at large karma terminals. Any party member can learn any mantra at any point in the game too. This feature leaves a lot of room for the player to experiment with different playstyles amongst their party members. For example, let's say that you want Surf and Ardua to switch up roles as support and healer. Surf would need to grind out mantras containing healing and cure spells, and Ardua would need to grind out mantras to obtain the buffs and debuffs she needs. It's kind of like the materia system from Final Fantasy VII. As long as you complete fights with something in the materia slot, leveling up the respective materia will grant you access to more powerful skills. I highly recommend purchasing and equipping a new mantra immediately after you've completed leveling the previous one whenever you're able to. I also recommend grinding out spells that you may not particularly care for, because there's gonna come a time where you'll find yourself in a dungeon facing enemies that are weak to the one spell that you don't have. Oh yeah, and make sure to save up a lot of money because mantras get expensive the farther up you move on the table. The mantra system rocks. It makes grinding feel more worthwhile, you can mess around and create whatever build you desire, and it gives you something to look forward to outside of just leveling up. Now, normally this would be the part where I'd segue back into the game's plot, but let's put that on hold and talk about the Hindu terminology that's been thrown around so far. Not only that, but I think things would flow better if I covered the next dungeon in Chapter 2. So let's talk mythology. There are lots of callbacks to Hindu mythos, with locations, objects, and even gameplay features being named after something within the religion's text. Let's start off with Atma. Atman is the soul that rests within oneself, that transmigrates either into a new life after death, or achieves moksha, which is freedom from the cycle of birth and rebirth. In the case of the Junkyard's inhabitants, you could say that the forms they take on is considered their Atman. Atma lives inside them, and everyone's doing what they can to reach Nirvana. Hell, in the first cutscene of the game, the writer behind the text is talking about unleashing something that lives inside of them. The main cast Atma forms bear the names of various Hindu gods as well. Surf's Atma is named Varuna. Don't let the game fool you though, as his name was not meant to be spelt with a U between R and N. The reason for this is because of a localization mistake that couldn't be corrected by the English team since the project was so far into development. They likely got the spelling confused with Varna, the social class system within Hindu societies. Anyways, in the Vedic period, Varuna is regarded as the god of sky, ocean, and the universe. He controls the weather, cleans water, and can even change the flow of waterways. When he's not doing all of those things, Varuna operates as the universe's overseer, governing moral law and punishing those whom violate it. It's very fitting that Surf's Atma was given such a name. Surf leads an entire army, oversees his own territory and everything going on within it, and he starts the game off using ice attacks. As for Varuna's design, I'm a big fan of how mechanical his body is while still maintaining the appearance of a demon. I can say the same thing about all the other party members' Atma. The crown thing at the top of Varuna's head definitely helps his design look complete. If they just went with making Varuna bald or didn't give him a head in the first place, I think he'd end up looking a bit awkward and unfinished. Up next is Heat. Heat's Atma is called Agni, named after the Hindu god of fire. Agni's role was to deliver messages from the gods to the people of Earth and vice versa. In the Vedic era, Agni was considered to be an integral part of sacrificial rituals. I think the parallels between Heat and Agni are pretty clear. Fire is typically associated with destruction and aggression, and Heat fits the bill perfectly. Heat acts as muscle for Surf's infiltration team, having to put the screws on somebody when necessary. The guy also struggles with controlling his angry outbursts and violent urges, only being able to suppress them, well, whenever he can. As for his Atma, Agni is red and he starts off the game with fire attacks. His design's pretty fun to look at too. The scales on Agni's torso looks like shoulder pads you'd see American football players wear. It's also nice that the designer placed additional scales on his hips to keep the design consistent. In place of an actual head, Agni has two mouths where his neck should be. For physical attacks, Agni uses these retractable blades that come from between his fingers. They're kind of like Wolverine's claws, except they're not. I don't know, you get the idea. Next party member is Arjula. Her Atma is called Prithvi, named after the Hindu goddess of earth. In mythology, Prithvi is portrayed as a nurturing and kind goddess while also being a personification of femininity. With Arjula, it's pretty obvious why Prithvi is her Atma's namesake. She's the peacekeeper of the group, and tends to shy away from plans or things she deems devious, such as when Embryon planned to deceive one of the rival factions to get a one-up in the war. When transformed, Prithvi's body is donned in a dark green military-style camouflage pattern. I like how her design is colored this way to represent the earth, its grass, and soil, as both a reference to goddess Prithvi and Arjula starting off the game with earth skills. The mouths for this Atma are placed where her breasts would normally be. What I like about this design is how it maintains Arjula's femininity through stuff like making certain body parts more curved, giving her Atma heels, and even through something like her victory animation. Prithvi attacks using her arms that have now transformed into whips that she can extend and pull back. Our fourth party member is Cello. His Atma is called Dyaus, named after the Hindu god of the sky. Keeping in line with his namesake, Cello's Atma is given wings and he starts off with electric skills. Cello serves as the comedic relief of the crew. He likes to try and keep group morale high, maintaining a positive attitude even in dire situations. Cello speaks in a horribly voiced Caribbean accent, sounding more like someone putting on such a voice as a joke rather than someone that's actually from the islands.
Obviously, Sarah isn't this tall, her hair is way different, and her arms ain't that thick. Ooh!
As for his Atma, it looks like a fusion of a pterodactyl and I guess a hammerhead shark? I don't know, that's what I see. Design still goes hard though. Dyaus attacks with his horn, but when executing critical moves, he uses his wings to deal damage. The design also fits Cello's attitude. He's carefree and upbeat, so why not convey that by giving him wings and letting him fly around a little? And finally, our fifth party member, Gale. His Atma is called Vayu, named after the Hindu god of the winds. And fun fact, Vayu, just like Agni, is also a messenger for the gods. Gale is Embryon's tactician, overseeing battle strategy and the movements of the army. Not only that, but Gale serves as an advisor to Surf, giving him advice on how to proceed. Gale's Atma is colored green, taking after the color's association with wind and, of course, his namesake. Vayu's an agile creature, being able to jump from one surface to the other within the blink of an eye. For attacking, he uses these blades affixed to the back of his legs. Gale is the most introverted of the crew, speaking only when necessary and barely showing any emotion. Because of his demeanor, this allows him to lay out plans without emotion getting in the way of logic. Gale also has a hard time identifying with the rest of Embryon's emotional reactions to certain events, but in spite of that, he's loyal to the group, willing to see through whatever scheme they've hatched all the way to the very end. Now I want to talk about the karma terminals and what they represent. So what is karma? Karma refers to a deed, whether positive or negative, and the outcomes that occur either in the moment, sometime down the road, or even later on in life. The karma terminals build off of this by rewarding the player Atma points and mantras for finishing battles. According to one of the tutorials, the in-universe explanation for this is that the karma temple is monitoring each fight that goes on and rewards anyone who comes out of them alive. So what are mantras? In Hindu practice, a mantra is a spoken or thought of syllable, word, or phrase that'll cast some form of magical effect on the speaker. In the context of Digital Devil Saga, it's somewhat similar, with the mantras each containing a set of spells that the player can use. I like how they tie karma and mantras together, with the player being rewarded money and Atma points for their actions by the Junkyard's overseers in order to purchase a mantra containing greater power. That brings me to the Junkyard itself. Each sector is named after a specific chakra that's used during meditation, with there being 7 in total. Now originally for this section, I was gonna shotgun it and break down each chakra here, but I think it's better if I break them down one by one as I go through each dungeon. The first one is Muladhara, Embryon's headquarters. Translated from Sanskrit, Mula means root, and Adhara means support or base. As the translation implies, this is the first out of 7 chakras. Muladhara represents the foundation of one's energy and how it operates within the body. This being the name of Embryon's base is pretty self-explanatory. They're the main cast, and after the first set of cutscenes, Muladhara is the first locale where the player is given control. Not only that, but after everyone gets their powers, the main cast tries to maintain some sort of peace around their home base in order to keep themselves from eating each other. As long as they keep looking after one another and maintain morale, this army shouldn't fail. That's the same principle of Muladhara. When this chakra is balanced, you'll feel confident and level-headed. When it's imbalanced, your mental health takes a nosedive and you'll end up feeling depressed, anxious, and insecure, like your whole world is falling apart. One more thing I want to touch on is Nirvana. In Hinduism, this concept is known as moksha. Moksha is the act of your soul being liberated from the cycle of birth and rebirth. This can only be attained if you've lived a life of performing good deeds and just being a good person in general. Achieving moksha is the ultimate goal. The journey to achieve moksha is long and difficult though. It comes with its sets of ups, downs, struggles, successes, and failures. All of that is reflected in Embryon's journey to this mysterious Nirvana place. It's a place where everyone wants to go, and the team needs to stand tall and stick together as they navigate the Junkyard, uncover damaging secrets, and fight off the many adversaries whom are all willing to do anything and everything it takes to leave this godforsaken land. Now that the situation at Karma Temple has been confirmed, let's head back to Embryon's base so that we can close out this chapter. Confusion is at a fever pitch in the strategy room. The crew doesn't know who Angel and Sarah are, and chief among that, they don't know what to do next. That's until Surf speaks up and says that they should continue the pursuit for Nirvana. Everyone agrees, and Gale lays out a plan of attack for us.
As we are aware, there is only one way to reach Nirvana. That is to defeat the 5 other ruling tribes and present ourselves to the temple. The largest tribe, the Brutes, is presently struggling against the Wolves. It is unclear whether the Solids or Maribel pose the next greatest threat. As for us, though we defeated the Vanguards, we are severely lacking in manpower.
Who cares? We'll devour them one by one.
Easier said than done. What's your plan?
If we feign an alliance with one of the weaker tribes and defeat their rival, we can then crush them afterward.
It's a pretty simple but effective plan. Arjula notes the change in Gale's demeanor, but he denies this, saying that everyone else has changed except for him. As for Sarah, she's gonna stay back at HQ while Cielo and Gale guards her. Gale also issues a gag order regarding her presence at the base. All eyes turn to Surf as he's asked how they should proceed. There's gonna come a time in certain cutscenes where you'll be asked to make a choice. Each decision has an effect on the outcome of the scene itself, dialogue, and even some of the stuff that happens in the second game. Choose wisely. As for this retrospective, I'll be choosing dialogue that I feel would be appropriate. Surf decides to proceed with Gale's plan, and Arjula doesn't feel right about this, but all she can do is just go along with it. Gale notes that while the leader of the Maribels is strong, the rest of their crew is pretty weak. Now that the plan has been laid out, the next step is to use deception to crush Maribel and take out the rest of the tribes in the Junkyard.